Thank you. I appreciate the time. I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about the journey that we've been on with SDI. I've been working with SDI prior to my time with Netafim, and 7 years with Netafim. And I guess I felt like it might be time. I've talked to you guys at this group every year in that 7-year period. And I thought it might be time to just kind of return to some of the fundamental things that we've discovered that we feel like they're important. So they're kind of building blocks or foundational kinds of things that as we look at some of the new things that Stephen and Jason are going to talk about after I'm done visiting with you, just wanted to kind of set the table for that. Some of the information that I'll share has something to do with those guys. So I guess I just take a couple minutes just to go through. So I have to start with an apology. So because I have several things, they're not necessarily in any order at all, but basically what I'm going to share with you is a summary. So if you have questions about any of these items, any of these things, there's a lot of details that are behind them. I don't have time to go through all the details. So if you have questions, if you've heard me talk, you've gotten the whole story prior to what the summary slide that I'm sharing with you. But if you want some of the backstory, happy to share that with you. So first of all, we use a lot of soil moisture probes to understand where we're at in the soil and when to irrigate, how much to irrigate. And one of the big questions that we have discovered is, where do I place the soil moisture probe? If you have overhead irrigation, you have somewhat of a uniform application. With drip irrigation and the emitter, it's not as uniform necessarily as rainfall is. So where do I position the soil moisture probe? So our initial thought was, well, we wanted to measure the moisture in the bubble. So we want to be between the two bubbles, along the dripper line, in between two drippers, and halfway between where the emitter is and the crop is. And so we started there, and it was really good, but some of the irrigation systems that we put on are micro irrigation. We put on really small amounts, and the probes have sensors that aren't sensitive enough. So we were irrigating and not seeing anything on the probe information. So we decided to move it, so best placement for the soil moisture probe. And when the NutraDrip guys come out and put your probes in, they're putting it about 7 inches over from the emitter and 7 inches in between the emitters, about a 7 by 7 placement. So getting it at the right place gives us the correct information to do irrigation and to schedule irrigation. So how do I read the information? We usually have the full line and the refill line, and operating our irrigation system between the full and the refill point. What is the refill point? It's not the point at which the plant's going to die because there's not enough water. That is the point that there's no yield reduction if I wait to get to that point. So I want to be sure that I'm within that full line and that refill line. There's still room in the soil to pull water, for the plant to pull water, but you'll limit yield if you get below the refill line. This is one of the soil moisture probes that the NutraDrip guys use, the Aqua Spies. This is a Centec. Same principle, the full line and the refill line, and maintaining the moisture, soil moisture at that level gives me the best chance for the plant to not lose any yield. The nutrients are available, the best level of availability at that point. So if you've listened to me talk much at all, we always talk about uptake charts and what nutrient is uptaking at what stage of growth. And so I've got all the uptake charts. I'm not going to go through them, but we learned that each nutrient, the plant wants to eat that nutrient maybe at a different level. So the uptake for nitrogen is slightly different than potassium, maybe not so much. Sulfur is different in the fact that it uses it season long. Phosphorus uses it season long. nitrogen and potassium are more when you're building the factory, building the plant, it wants to eat the majority of it. That doesn't mean that we don't need nitrogen after tassel time or potassium after tassel time. We absolutely need it, but the amount that's uptake by the plant. So understanding that and understanding with a drip system, you have a delivery system that you can put the nutrient on ahead of when the plant needs it. So the whole idea is to stay ahead of the nutrient needs. And again, that's something that we've studied and we've learned and continue to evolve to best practices. And that will be something I suspect you guys later will talk about as well. Tissue testing keeps us out of the ditch. One tissue look at one day in time isn't the whole world. We need to understand that we need to look at trends. We need to understand where's our target. We need to understand, what am I trying to do? There's nutrients that are available in the water like Kurt talked about, but also nutrients that are available in the soil. How do I improve availability with remediation of the water, remediation of the soil? Testing, measuring, and managing, if you remember nothing else, but measuring and managing gives us the strength of leveraging what we have with the drip system. We can change the environment at any point in time, all season long. And so tissue testing is one of the things that we've been using and learning and evolving, and the relationship between what's in the soil and what's in the plant. We used to think at one time it doesn't matter what's in the soil, it matters what's in the plant. And that's true to an extent. We also have to understand how will the soil give that nutrient to the plant? How much is it available? So tissue testing is very important. We feel it's very important. We need to understand what's going on in the plant and also understand the availability part. So this is a chart that we started charting. A number of you have started charting nutrients through a growing season. So this is the level of the nutrient. This is nitrogen, the level of the nutrient, and numbers, 5%, 6%, and then the growing season left to right, emergence all the way through to maturity. And I'm not going to talk at length about where this particular grower is at, but this white line is a very high yield grower, a guy that's made 500 bushel plus. Is his goal for the nutrient in the plant. And almost without exception, everybody's nutrients that we're looking at are in this range here. We need to figure out how can we drive the maximum amount of a nutrient into a plant as possible, especially early. We almost look at, the majority of our guys are trending down, and this is where the super high yield guys are going. So there's a call to action there. There's a realization as I look at this and say, okay, that's the challenge that we have. If we didn't chart this, if we didn't measure it, we wouldn't understand how to manage it. So there's a call to action, and working with good partners that NutraDrip has, that Netafim has, will help us hopefully to do this. This is another chart for potassium. I don't have every nutrient up here, but again, this is where a 500 bushel grower wants to have his nutrient. And again, we reach the level that they're at later in the season after tassel time, we're okay, but this is where we're losing yield. This is where we're establishing kernel count, girth at V5, V6, and length, the overall maximum length. We're determining those items early in the growth stage, and then later on, all that nutrient moves into the grain, and the tissue sample is taken from the plant tissue. So So again, understanding what we're measuring and understanding what level of goal that we have is very important. So another thing that has been fun to discover, when we got a drip system, we look at the uptake charts and we think, you know what, I can put almost all of my nutrients on with the drip system. And what we realized was when that plant is really small and the roots are really small and the dripper line is down 12 or 14 or 16 inches in the ground, I can't impact that, or I can't affect the nutrient level in the plant. So we did a research study at the University of Illinois to try and figure out what is the correct amount of nitrogen up front that I need to have with my drip system. And so in this particular, and this is a multi-year study, and perhaps Stephen might talk a little bit more in depth about some of these things, but I hope I'm not stealing his thunder. But so what we did here is we put on 0 pre-plant nitrogen up front, 50, 100, 150, 200, and then through the fertigation we started at V3 and put on, following the uptake chart, if you remember the uptake chart, following the uptake chart, we put on the amount of nitrogen that we thought we needed, 160 pounds total in addition to this. So as we looked at rain-fed, which is not fertigated, with 0 pounds of nitrogen, in Illinois they grow 95 bushel corn. With just the uptake chart nitrogen, that's 0 up front of nitrogen, we could raise 200 bushel corn in those soils. So grow a respectable amount of corn, but if you add 50 pounds up front, you add 50 bushels. If you add 100, you add 80, 150, 95 bushel to the yield with just that rate. So these all got the same amount. So the sweet spot that we kind of figured after 2 or 3 years is about 100 to 150 pounds of nitrogen up front. In this soil, that represents about half of the total nitrogen that we needed. So the conclusion was, even though we have an awesome delivery system, we can't rely 100%, at least of the nitrogen, up front. We have to put some on up front and then use the delivery system through the season. So whoops, excuse me. That. No, it won't go back. There it goes. So in sand, where I can lose a lot of nitrogen, there's a potential for leaching. About 1/3 of the nitrogen up front is kind of where we ended up. And if I'm in good soils that will hold it and aren't capable of leaching it as much, about half the nitrogen up front is kind of the conclusion. It was an excellent study and a good partner to be with the University of Illinois. So another thing that the University of Illinois did was a quest. And they did quest for 500 bushel corn and, what was it, 150 beans? What was it, Stephen? Yeah, 150 beans. So a lot of background, a lot of detail, but I just wanted to show you what is the possibility. What is the possibility? This wasn't an economic exercise. This was what physiologically can the plant do if we push population, if we push nutrients, if we protect with fungicides, season long, what is the potential? And part of it was a hybrid. So this study is a standard practice, dryland farmer in Illinois, in 30-inch rows at the population, I think it's 32,000 or something like that. This is what each of them grew, averaging about 200 bushel. With intensive practices, populations up to 60,000, this is averaging everything together, intense fertilizer through the drip system, again, maximum protection, fungicide, a lot of practices that intense. The average over multiple years was 340, which is about 130, 140 bushels plus. So a lot went into this, but what this gives us a chance to see is what is the potential, what is the possibility if I start to use my drip system and intensively manage it. What is the possibility to jump from what a current dry land, and this is good Illinois soil, some of the best Illinois soil, some of the best soil in the world, when we can grow 200 bushel corn, you know, most of the time. So it's a fun study. They've done this for a number of years, and will continue to do it. Next thing I wanted to talk about was phosphorus. We get a lot of questions about, can I put phosphorus in my drip system? What kind of impact or what kind of expectation can I do with phosphorus? So we did some work, and this is Kansas State University out of Colby, western Kansas. We looked at the amount of phosphorus, if you put it all on up front, versus piecemealing it at 3 additional times. So the comparison was, if I put it all on up front, which is the control here, versus adding phosphorus fertilizer in 2 different scenarios. The study was set up at key times. Again, at girth determination time, prior to between V4 and V6, we were putting on a really small amount. One of them was like 4 pounds, the other one was like 6 or 8 pounds, and then another shot of 4 or 8 pounds during about V10 to V13 ear length determination time, and then 1 shot at tassel time. So we broke the phosphorus, the same exact amount of phosphorus, broke it into 3 different stages and applied, and again, this is orthophosphates, phosphorus version that is approved for irrigation, and that's something that if you want to do that, be sure you use that version. The other thing that this study studied was zinc, different things of zinc. We never really saw an additional yield from the zinc, so I'm not going to spend any time talking about that. But over 3 years, 2015 to 2017, the check was about 260. We were able to add close to 20 bushels each year of the 3 years, so average about 20 bushels with this application of phosphorus. And again, it's not additional phosphorus, it's the same amount, everything up front versus in season through the drip system. And one other caveat that was interesting is these are high testing phosphorus soils. We're talking part per million levels of 35, 40, up past 50 parts per million soil test levels. So a lot of soil test labs would say you're good on your phosphorus, you don't really need any. So this is a high testing soil, which makes this information even more appealing, that if I can drive 20 bushels yield with some small amounts of well-timed phosphorus, it's certainly appealing. So again, adding about 20 bushels, 3 years in a row, pretty consistent results. Where did it come from? Came from kernels, number of kernels on the ear. And again, because we targeted that girth and length time, we put on maximum number of kernels. The check was about 560 kernels per ear. We were adding about 30 kernels per ear on average through the 3 years. Again, very interesting information. The weight wasn't impacted that much with the phosphorus. The test weight was about the same, but the number of kernels was additional, and that's where that yield came from. A couple more things that we've learned, and again, we talked about pushing the maximum amount of nutrients into the plant that we can, needs to be balanced. We learned that. We can't put all of our money in nitrogen. Nitrogen certainly is showy, it makes the plant big and green, but if it's starving for other nutrients, we're not able to drive yield unless we bring up every nutrient and have a balance of nutrients. It's true in the plant, it's true in the soil, and again, that's some of the things that guys that we'll talk about later, but this certainly there's an additional benefit when we bring all nutrients up together, and it needs to be in a balance. Last thing, and one of the last things I'll talk about is soybean. Certainly the uptake charts, and the real goodie with soybean is between about late flowering up through grain fill. That's when a lot of the nutrients, potassium especially. So as you look at using your drip system, we can sure benefit early with some of these, like we talked about, setting the stage earlier with the corn, but the real goodie and the heavy lifting with soybeans is done from flowering through grain fill. That's the focus. And if you guys are irrigators, you understand that. That's when, when you add water to soybeans, you're going to add a lot of yield. That's when the nutrients, that's when it's starving to eat the nutrients as well. And again, Kurt already talked about pH and the importance of pH, importance of availability with pH, so I don't need to say much more on that. Certainly it's something that all of us are recognizing, the importance of the pH and availability, and again, the guys later on are going to talk about that. So kind of a summary of, we started talking about, when we started on this journey, water and nutrients. How do we manage the water? How do we manage the nutrients with tissue testing? And it's a measure then manage approach is what we've learned. Measure then manage. If you don't measure, you're guessing. And when you're guessing, you could be wrong. We worked into doing the tissue and soil levels and recommendations. Now we're in this place where we're looking at physical and chemical levels of the soil and what impacts availability. That's going to be a big part of what we're talking about today. And biology. How does soil health and biology impact the efficiency of the plant, the effectiveness, the availability, and ultimately the yield. So it's been a journey as we've learned this. We discover new things and discover where we need to go next. And I'm excited to be here today, excited to be here, a part of today's meetings. So that's all I have. If there's any questions for me, or like I said, I kind of gave you the summary slides of a lot of the things that I've talked about over the years. If you want to visit more, I'm happy to do it.